Hello everyone, Donkey Storm here, and after the amount of interest that was shown in my Frost DK video, I'm now going to bring you a preview of the Unholy Death Knight in Shadowlands. The footage you'll be seeing in this video is from the current PTR build, which has all the Shadowlands class changes in effect, but does still allow you to benefit from essences and azurite traits, so DPS numbers are still not really worth noting from this information. Instead, we'll be paying attention to the changes that have happened to the spec and how the spec feels to play, whether or not it's going to be enjoyable. Since I did just cover Frost, there is going to be some duplicate information here, so apologies for that if you've already watched the Frost video. But to be thorough, I am still going to cover the full spec. As always, if you like what you see, please hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to see more of my Shadowlands content down the line. Alright, let's get into it. First off, we've got some new rune forges to talk about. Definitely a welcome change since DKs have been using the same rune forges for who knows how long. But will any of these new runes actually beat out the tried and true Fallen Crusader for Unholy? Let's take a look. First of all, we've got Rune of Hysteria, which increases runic power by 20 and gives a chance to increase runic power generation by 20% for 8 seconds. That's a lot of runic power added through this rune. And while it did feel good to use, I'll need to see some sims or DPS numbers to know if it's a realistic contender for a PvE rune choice. So nothing too fancy here, just a RP buff. Next up, we got Rune of Sanguination, which gives your Death Strike a damage boost depending on your target's missing amount of health. And also when you fall below 35% health, you heal for 48% of your health over 8 seconds. Basically, it's a blood DK rune, and Unholy probably won't be using it. We've got Rune of Spell Warding, which deflects 3% of all spell damage and has a chance to create a shield that absorbs magic damage equal to 10% of your maximum health. When an enemy damages the shield, their cast speed is reduced by 10% for 6 seconds. It's a pretty niche rune to protect against spell damage, something that maybe you would take in a PvP situation, but for PvP, you probably won't be seeing this one. Rune of Apocalypse is an interesting one, and if any spec's going to take it, I guess it would be Unholy. This gives your ghoul a chance to apply one of 4 debuffs to the target: a healing reduction, a damage taken increase, damage dealt reduction, and a slow and damage over time. The unfortunate thing here being you can't control which debuff the ghoul gives the target. Also, the debuffs they're really tiny, 1 to 3%, and they drop off the target awfully quickly. When I was playing around with this one, it didn't really seem viable, to be honest, although I don't have any numbers to back that up. I'd love to be wrong because I think it's a really cool idea. And then lastly, we've got Rune of Unending Thirst. This grants 10% haste and movement speed and heals you for 5% of your maximum health when you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. It also increases your movement speed when you're dead by 10%. Aren't we always dead? Anyways, as much as I would love anything that grants DK's movement speed, I don't know if the 10% haste is going to overtake Fallen Crusader without seeing some sim or DPS numbers. But man, could we ever use that speed boost? So all in all, while I think the new rune forges are nice ideas, it remains to be seen if any of them will actually overtake the ones we've been using for years now. Let's hope that the sims show that there will be several viable options, because the whole idea of rune forging gets a little stale when we always use the same ones over and over again. Like all classes, Unholy DKs will also benefit from several unpruned abilities, many of which were either used to be spec specific or were removed from the game in the past. These include Anti-Magic Zone, Lichborn, and Chains of Ice for Unholy. Anti-Magic Zone is going to add some nice utility for Unholy DKs in raids and dungeons, a place where they needed a little bit of love, and Lichborn will be a useful CC break. Additionally, Summon Gargoyle becomes a baseline ability rather than a talent. Let's take a look at the Unholy talent tree. Similar to Frost, there is only one change made in the entire Unholy tree. With Summon Gargoyle becoming a baseline ability for Unholy, it gets replaced with Unholy Pact, a new talent that creates flaming chains between you and your dark transformation and also gives you an 8% strength boost while active. It's kind of a weird talent. You'll see me using it here. I don't really care for talents that are going to require me to spend too much brain power manipulating my pet's wonky AI to maximize their damage. Given the other talents on the row, it's hard for me to imagine this being a go-to talent unless it's completely overtuned. Speaking of this row of talents, Army of the Damned gets some changes in Shadowlands as well. It now causes your Army of the Dead to summon a skeletal mage, in addition to its old functionality of having Death Coil and Epidemic reduce the cooldown of Army of the Dead. Never felt like Unholy needed a complete rework or anything, but I'm a little disappointed to see so few new toys in the Unholy kit. If you're looking for something shiny and new to start a new expansion, Unholy is not looking like that type of spec. If you already enjoy the spec, however, you do get a few quality of life improvements, and I don't think you can argue that any of the changes are going to negatively affect the spec. So next up, we're going to get into Covenant abilities. This is pretty similar to what I talked about in my Frost video, but we're going to go over the abilities and how they might interact with Unholy versus Frost as well. Covenant abilities are borrowed power in Shadowlands, and you only get to choose one of these based on which Covenant you align yourself with. First of all, we've got the Kyrian ability, Shackle the Unworthy. Reduces the damage the target does to you by 5% and adds an arcane damage dot over the next 14 seconds. It's on a 1-minute cooldown, and while Shackle the Unworthy is active on an enemy, rune spending attacks reduce its cooldown by 4 seconds. So this might be a pretty good single target DPS, and it looks like it will have a lot of uptime. My issue with it being that it just doesn't appear very Death Knight-y. An arcane damage over time spell. It's got kind of a glowy blue visual effect on its target, and although it might end up being pretty good single target, it just doesn't feel very imaginative or really have much class flavor to it, in my opinion. The Vithir Covenant ability, Swarming Mist, creates a heavy mist around you for 8 seconds, increasing your chance to dodge by 10%. Deals shadow damage every 1 second to enemies within 10 yards, and every time it does deal damage, you gain 3 runic power, up to a maximum of 15. Another 1-minute cooldown ability that should see a lot of uptime. This one's got a red glowy effect that definitely feels more in line with the class, and on a 1-minute cooldown again, meaning a lot of uptime. Seems like a pretty solid AoE ability with that short cooldown, damage, and RP generation. The Necrolord ability is called Abomination Limb. You sprout an additional limb for 12 seconds, and every 1 second it deals shadow damage to all nearby enemies and pulls an enemy to your location if they're further than 8 yards away. This one's on a 2-minute cooldown. The extra limb is a tentacle-looking thing that pops out of your back, so another ability with class flavor, a bit longer cooldown, and AoE damage. I guess Sims will tell us whether this or Swarming Mist is going to be a better AoE choice. This is a creative one. I definitely think players want abilities like this in the game, so let's hope that the numbers make this a viable choice as well. Finally, we've got the Night Fae ability, Death's Due. This replaces Death and Decay. This ability corrupts the targeted ground using shadow damage over the next 10 seconds to targets within the area. Enemies deal 1% reduced damage to you up to a maximum of 15%, and their power is transferred to you as an equal amount of strength. So the more enemies affected by the ability, the more strength you get from it. This one's on a 30-second cooldown. So of the 4 Death Knight Covenant abilities, we've got 1 pure single target and 3 AoE abilities. It's going to be really interesting to see where players take this, as having to choose between AoE and single target damage is not always a simple choice to make. Aside from Shackle the Unworthy, the DK Covenants are pretty interesting, and they match the class pretty well. As always, let's hope the damage numbers also make them competitive. So what's the verdict on Unholy Death Knights? Like many classes going into Shadowlands, not much is really changing. You're gaining a little bit of PvE utility with Anti-Magic Zone and Lichborn. Summon Gargoyle, going baseline, makes room for an additional talent, and you get some new rune forges to play with. The Unholy playstyle doesn't appear to be changing much at all from BFA, and while minor changes appear to me to all come across as slight buffs, don't expect anything radically different in the next expansion. That's going to do it for my Unholy DK video. I want to thank you for watching and give a brief shout out to all of my viewers. The channel just hit 300 subs after only 2 short months of existence. So thanks to every single person who's supported me in that way. I really do appreciate you, and it actually means a lot to me. So this has been Donkey Storm, and I will see you next time.